Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here on a Sunday morning, isn't it? You kind of, in festival time, you lose track of what day of the week it is, but it is a Sunday morning. Thank you for being here. I can't think of a better time to give to poetry, so thank you for that. Hi, William.
Hello.
It's so good to have you here.
Thank you.
I've been a fan of the Poetry Pharmacy for a while, and it has seen me through some very difficult times. So I was delighted when I was asked to do this. You call yourself a poetry pharmacist. That's a really curious term. And I was kind of thinking, how did he come up with that? How do you get to that? And then I got thinking, actually, how did you get into poetry at all? You know, where does that journey start for you? So if you don't mind, I thought maybe we could throw it right back to the beginning. So what was that kind of moment where poetry or this passion kind of seeded itself in you?
Well, I think a lot of people discover poetry in times of great need in their life, when they're grieving, when they're dealing with a broken heart, that kind of stuff. And my most challenging moment in my early life was this rather strange habit that the British have of sending their children to boarding school. And I was 8, and I was sent hundreds of miles away from my home to a place where no one loved me. And in a way, I suppose it sort of marked my psyche and my life ever since. But the one thing that this school thought I was good at was reading poetry aloud. And I won the Hampshire Under-11 Latin reading competition and a 10-shilling book token, which gives you an idea of how old I am. But that sort of began my relationship with poetry. And as I grew up, I found myself learning poems off by heart. I think in a way I was sort of self-medicating with poetry, and I had an extraordinary experience in my early 20s when I was crossing a place called the Cromwell Road in London. And for those of you who've been there, you'd know it, but it's a sort of almost like a motorway. It's sort of 6-lane highway, and you have to wait at the lights to cross. And the man standing in front of me crossed as the lights went red, and a car jumped the lights. And he was hit, and I can still now sort of see and hear the incident of his body flying through the air and the screeches of brakes and so on. And a first aider in the crowd grabbed me and asked me to help give him the kiss of life because his pulse had gone. And astonishingly, this first aider brought the pulse back, and there was an ambulance and the police, and in a matter of moments, it was all over, it seemed, and I was standing in the same spot by the traffic lights, and the only evidence I had was that I had blood on my hands. And I did what most Brits do in the circumstances. I went to the pub and got a large gin and tonic to try and sort of cope with my anguish. But I had learnt a poem quite recently before that called Ambulances, and it's written by Philip Larkin, and he says in it how it's all about watching your next door neighbour go in an ambulance for the very last time, and at that moment you sense the solving emptiness that lies just under everything we do, and for a moment get it whole, so permanent and blank and true. And that really helped me make sense of this.
More than the G&T.
More than the G&T. In parallel, perhaps, in partnership. But I think that was the beginning of my real understanding, in hindsight.
Of poetry as prescription, kind of.
Yeah.
And when did you make this official? When did you start doling out prescriptions?
Well, first of all, my next stage of my journey was when for my 30th birthday, a friend brought me a second-hand copy of the Guinness Book of Poetry. And I knew about the Guinness Book of Records, but I'd never heard of the Guinness Book of Poetry.
It's the first I'm hearing of it.
Yeah.
Did you? Yeah.
So in the 1950s, there was a poet called Brian Moyne, who was a member of the Guinness family, and he persuaded them to invest a little bit of their profits from their delicious stout into a bit of art sponsorship, and they sponsored a prize called the Guinness. And with the Guinness came the Guinness Book of Poetry. And once I saw this book, I was gripped. The first poem in the book was This is the night train crossing the border, bringing the cheque and the postal order. W.H. Auden's poem about the Royal Mail, and a number of other poems I'd been made to learn at school off by heart. And I thought, this is brilliant. This is the whole idea of presenting poetry as a contemporary, accessible thing, whereas most poetry is presented, you know, when you learn it at school, you read it, it was written hundreds of years ago, all that, and it kind of doesn't really grab you, does it? So I came up with the idea of the Forward Prize from this, and I was 32, I think, when I got it going, and then National Poetry Day, and all of these were attempts to get poetry out of Poetry Corner. You know, if you go into a bookshop, there's that little shy end corner that most people don't inhabit, and that's where one day a wonderful friend of mine I was sharing an office with said to me, "You're always sending me poems to cheer me up. I'm programming a literary festival, much like JLF, but in a place called Cornwall in the west of England." And she said, photocopy every poem you can think of that might be helpful, and I've designed and printed you a prescription pad, and I'm going to put you in a tent with a box of tissues, and people can come and tell you their worries. And so I turned up, and I thought this would be a gimmick for a couple of hours. And 5 hours later, with an incredibly full bladder, I popped out for a little comfort break, and there was a blackboard outside the tent, and I was booked up for the next 3 days. And I thought, this is astonishing. And at the end of the festival, the day after, I got a phone call from someone, and she said, "You dispensed a prescription to me on Saturday, and I work for BBC Radio 4. Can you come on the radio on Saturday?" And the journey went from there, really.
That's amazing. I just want to go back to what you said about, poetry being, this little corner of the bookshop that most people don't visit. And it kind of, over the years, it became a bit stuffy, right? And also a bit alienating, intimidating, not something that felt very inclusive. And what I loved about your books is that you actually, for every poem, firstly, they're divided by condition. So, for example, I've just opened to a random page here, and the condition is general restlessness, and it says also suitable for fear of commitment, boredom with the easy life, loss of perspective, discontent with stability. So it's very specific ailments, and then there's the poem. But what you also have done is, for every poem you've included, you've kind of, and for every condition, you've written a little bit of an essay. So it's a tiny
prescription.
Yeah, so it's a one-page prescription, yes, yeah. And I love that. So can you talk about that a little bit? And then I was thinking after that, maybe you could tell us about some specific conditions, and Sumanto could read the corresponding prescription poems.
Yes. Well, I think that people are frightened of poetry. I think it intimidates people. I call it the P word. As I say, people shuffle past Poetry Corner in the bookshop, and I think it's to do with teachers and intermediaries, librarians and booksellers also being a bit frightened of poetry. But actually, we love poetry. I mean, look at this country. Your language is just filled with the poetic tradition. Same in Britain, but we're a bit shy, a bit embarrassed about it. In Britain, we love greetings cards, which have some perhaps not very high quality poetry, but we're the biggest consumers of greetings cards per population in the world. And I once met a guy who publishes greetings cards, and he said, "Oh, I've got one person who writes them. I can guarantee I can sell 100,000. He's a poet." So I said, "Well, he's the best-selling poet, around the world." There we go. So the whole idea of the prescription is to give people context, and I think this is what's made these books break out of Poetry Corner and be by the till, as you might say, because it's focused around your condition. You look up in the index how you feel, and then there are 3 or 4 paragraphs I've written about that condition. I've listened to over, thousands of people now, one-on-one, talk to me, unburden themselves of their worries. So I've got used to how people feel, and it's a little just an introduction to explain why the poem on the other side of the page might help.
I was thinking about how you spoke about going off to boarding school, and I was thinking about, how another one of the deterrents to poetry is sometimes the homes we come from. And that got me thinking about parenting. And you do have a prescription for pushy parenting.
I
And
thought it'd be very appropriate to start with that because I feel that in the UK we're very good or bad at pushy parenting. But my experience of India is that India's probably guilty of pushy parenting too. So let's get going with that.
Are we? Sumanto, could you read the poem? I think it's Do Not Ask Your Children to Strive. That's
Yes. Do Not Ask Your Children to Strive by William Martin. Do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Such striving may seem admirable, but it is the way of foolishness. Help them instead to find the wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes, apples, and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand, and make the ordinary come alive for them. The extraordinary will take care of itself.
so beautiful.
Lovely, Sumanto, lovely.
That was really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
What are some of your favorite prescriptions in the book? In the books, plural.
Gosh, there are about 155 in the three I've written, and there are another 55 on their way. So I probably think the most powerful prescription of the lot. So just to go back a bit, after I did my little Cornish festival, I was asked to do a review of the public libraries in the UK by the British government. And I didn't want to be a government inspector in a suit, so I offered to do a poetry pharmacy in every library I visited. And that's where I ended up listening to thousands of people's problems. And it was a humbling and a weighty experience. But what struck me was that the most common affliction of the modern era is loneliness. And look, everyone's nodding. You all know it. And why are we all lonely? We know why. It's this, isn't it? And it's extraordinary because we've got so many different platforms with which to communicate to people with this. And yet, it's not really communicating in the human sense. And actually, the pressure of maintaining your avatars on social media is almost tantamount to schizophrenia. And if you find that a challenge and you're an adult, try being 12. Now, I discovered what I think is the most potent and powerful poetry prescription. And I use it for loneliness, but for one or two other things. And it's 2 lines of poetry, written by, I think, one of the most extraordinary poets who ever lived. If you're Iranian, you'll say it's the only poet you ever need to read. He's called Hafez. He wrote in the 14th century. He lived in Shiraz, and he wrote, "I wish I could show you when you're lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being." I say to people, stick it on your mirror, learn it off by heart. Say it to yourself every single day, particularly if you live alone. And people seem to get out of the chair a foot taller. I wish I could show you when you're lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being.
Thank you. It is one of my favorite Hafiz lines, and I come back to it really often. Because we are all so lonely, I went to the cure for it in your book, this one, in case you're interested in tracing which one we're talking about, because there are 3 volumes, and this is the third. And there was a poem which, it comes under loneliness or isolation, but, you also call it the condition, the need for connection. And I liked that as a phrase. I think it encapsulates exactly what loneliness is. And the poem is called Small Kindnesses. And Sumanto, if you could read it, I would love it.
With pleasure.
Just to tell you, Danusha Lameris is an American poet, and just as the context for the poem.
Yeah. Small Kindnesses by Danusha Lameris. I've been thinking about the way, when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by. Or how strangers still say, "Bless you," when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot, and to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them and for them to smile back, for the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire. Only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy, these fleeting temples we make together when we say, "Here, have my seat. Go ahead, you first. I like your hat."
What a treat this session is. Thank you. I was just talking about this book. I held up this one. And I was wondering, do you prescribe us reading them in any particular order?
Well, there is an order in the sense that the orange or the red book came first. And in a way that was the product of a lifetime of, as I say, self-medicating. But I put an email address in the back of the first book, and I was overwhelmed by how many people responded. And I basically said in the email, with the email address, I'd said, send me the poems that have changed your life or inspired you. And I got a staggering amount of mail. I have box files at home of people telling me their stories and their selections and so forth. So the second book was a product, I suppose, of that, and also my tour, this sense of isolation that we were starting to experience, the loneliness that we were going through. And then came COVID. And suddenly we really were isolated, weren't we? And this book, the pink one, the Barbie one, amazingly, cleverly, Penguin decided to make it pink, and it came out the month that the Barbie film came out, which was one of the most clever pieces of brand marketing I'd ever come across. I don't think in hindsight it was on purpose, but there you go. But during lockdown, I thought my poetry pharmacy would stop, and of course, quite the opposite. It dialed up because we were also in need, and I got emails every single day from people, and most of all, I got emails from doctors. And they were incredibly moving. I don't know what it was like in India, but I imagine you were locked down a bit like we were. And we were learning to bake bread. We were, to some extent, enjoying family life together unexpectedly. But these people were dealing with death every day. I got an email from a doctor. Sorry, I well up even thinking about it. She said, "I've just got back home to my practice from 6 months working in hospital, COVID hospital, and I found 200 of my patients have gone." She said, "We need poems." So I got really, really moved and motivated by it. And the third book, in a way, is to deal with our post-COVID world. And I spent a long time, over the last year or two actually, working with the NHS, the National Health Service in Britain, and getting posters up in hospitals of these poems, because I don't know what it's like in an Indian hospital, but in a UK hospital there's nothing on the walls. You wait for hours and hours and hours thinking about and fear of your life and your future and so forth. And you need things, you need help. And so I've kind of really been working since COVID in seeing the therapeutic power in these kind of places where...
These bleak spaces.
These bleak spaces where it's most needed, yeah.
Just to give you a little more context, the introduction to this third book does cover this and is deeply moving, and I would highly recommend it, not just because, you know, we are all still living in the shadow of COVID somehow. You know, the other day I saw someone had posted and they said, you realize COVID was almost 7 years ago at this point. And I couldn't believe that, because it really feels like, okay, maybe 2 or 3 years, you know, and that's because we're still grieving that time. And so much has happened in the world since then that requires us to be constantly mourning and constantly in this state of grief and constantly looking for joy and prescription as well. And there was this wonderful condition which you call for pessimism. And I just thought that's a really, really good poem for us to read right now. So maybe you could, it's called Yes, I believe. Yeah, by William Stafford.
By the way, I would just say, get hold of this poem, Yes, by William Stafford, get it on the internet. It's, for where we are now, which gets worse every single moment, doesn't it? Let's face it. This is the poem that you need to read every morning.
Yes, by William Stafford. It could happen anytime. Tornado, earthquake, Armageddon. It could happen. Or sunshine, love, salvation. It could, you know. That's why we wake and look out. No guarantees in this life. But some bonuses, like morning, like right now, like noon, like evening.
Do you think it might be a good time to read Despair?
Please do.
Right? I feel that was so beautiful, and I actually think there's a poem for despair, which is kind of, it feels like a sister poem called Don't Hesitate.
Okay, I'm going to give you that one.
Are you going to read that one? Amazing. Because I feel the moment we're all in right now.
Yes, I mean, I'm old, and I've never had to encounter the difficulties of daily life in my entire life like we're dealing with now. And the collective anxiety, I read in the newspaper yesterday that they're measuring the anxiety of children, and it's now growing like never before. Well, we know why. It's a very difficult world to face. And one of my favorite go-to poets is a woman called Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver died a couple of years ago. She's an American poet, and she's well worth exploring. And then, as I say, this is one of my go-to poems for despair at the world. It's called Don't Hesitate. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind. And much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back. That sometimes something happens better than all the riches and power in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you notice it in the instance when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb.
Joy is not made to be a crumb.
How beautiful is that?
So gorgeous. Thank you for reading that. You read so well as well.
Thank you.
You have mentioned a couple of times how very old you are. And I was thinking, we are focusing in this session on the poetry pharmacy, but you've done so much with poetry in your life. And you kind of touched on those things very briefly, but would you tell us a bit more about that? About the prize, about Poetry Day. Those are really big things on their own. And I'd love to hear more about those chapters of your life as well.
Well, thank you. The prize, as I kind of explained, came from the Guinness Book of Poetry, and there is a forward book of poetry which comes out every year, because the prize is called the Forward Prize. It's now 34 years old, I think, yes. And a year later, I started National Poetry Day with the BBC, and that's their longest running arts partnership. Apart from the Proms, which are the sort of musical concerts, the classical musical concerts.
What was the response to the National Poetry Day, and how has it changed over the years?
It's fantastic, actually. And I'll tell you what's fantastic. It began with me, knocking on doors, making a poster that sent out to all the schools, that sort of thing. And then one day, when things really took off on social media, and Michelle Obama was the first lady.
I was not expecting that name right now.
Bizarrely, she must have come across it on Twitter, and she tweeted National Poetry Day, and suddenly it became the most tweeted thing of the day around the world. And that really sort of took off. But really, National Poetry Day, I think, is a chance for everyone to promote poetry and not be embarrassed. In our Anglo-Saxon world in Britain, we're a bit embarrassed about poetry. If I crossed the water to Dublin and belted out a poem in a pub, I'd probably be bought a couple of pints. If I did it in London, I might be, nutted by someone or whatever. So we're sort of shy and embarrassed about it. And
why do you think that is, though?
well, the British are just embarrassed, aren't they, really, on the whole? They don't like...
Do you have any prescriptions for that?
Well, there's a delightful little 4-line poem by Adrian Mitchell, which I like to bring out every once in a while to shy Brits, and particularly people who think that they're never going to find a partnership again. And just to explain, High Holborn is the name of a street, and it goes like this. It's called Celia, Celia. When I'm sad and weary, when I think all hope has gone, when I walk along High Holborn, I think of you with nothing on.
That's excellent. What about the future of the Poetry Pharmacy? What's next on the cards? I do know you have another book coming out, and you just said 55 poems?
Yes.
Is that it? Yeah. So is it... am I right when I call it the Book of Grief and Recovery?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes. It's my last one I'm going to do. It's same kind of structure as the Poetry Pharmacy, but again, post-COVID, we've really had to deal with this. And I think also there aren't, in my experience, very good books for people who are grieving, and also the nature of grief is changing. People are being given terminal diagnoses, but then they're told that they may have 5 years to cope with them. Also, people are having to deal with grief when they're dealing with parents, and they've lost them, but they're not dead. Dementia and Alzheimer's has created some really difficult problems. And so this book is structured for that, yeah. And with it, sorry, go on, no, you read your poem, because that's beautiful.
I just when William was telling me about this new book, just before we got on stage, I was telling him a little bit about my life and about how I've had a very difficult few years when it comes to my health. And how initially, because I think we're all a little embarrassed when it comes to poems, I turned away from poetry. And I think it's also because poetry insists on our vulnerability. And one day I came across this poem and it kind of punched me in the gut, and I realized this thing that I have been avoiding because I didn't want to face my feelings about it was actually precisely what I needed. And he asked me, which poem was it? And I shared the poem with him. And it just so happens that it's going to be in the next book as well. So I thought maybe I'll read this one out for all of you. It's called There You Are, and it's by Victoria Adukwe-Bule. There you are, this cold day, boiling the water on the stove, pouring the herbs into the pot, hawthorn, rose, buying the tulips and looking at them, holding your heart in your hands at the table, saying, please, please, to nobody else here in the kitchen with you. How hard, how heavy this all is, how beautiful these things you do, in case they help, these things you do which, although you haven't said it yet, say that you want to live.
Well done. So now, you asked me about the Forward Prize.
Yes.
And my whole theory about poetry is that although people think back of a bookshop and all of that, actually it is the most current art form of the lot. People come up, people with poets come up with the first reaction to everything. The first winner of the Forward Prize was Tom Gunn's The Man with Night Sweats, which is a gripping volume of verse about someone dying of AIDS in San Francisco in 1990. Long before you ever heard any plays, films, anything about AIDS. Earlier, the end of last year, I gave the Forward Prize in London at the Queen Elizabeth Hall on South Bank. And the winner of the Forward Prize for the best single poem was a small hijabbed lady called Abir Amir. And she read this poem. I don't even need to tell you the story. You'll get it. It's called At Least. It is said that they died in their sleep. One might imagine a peaceful state, at least. At least the moment the skies fell on their small bodies and the ground beneath crumbled, at least they were asleep, or at least they were in their beds. Maybe verses of solace were recited just before they drifted off, maybe. Lullabies were sung to mask the sound. Or at least they were used to the sound. It was probably background noise to them, white noise, because of their backgrounds, their ground, so used to it for most of their short lives. It is said that they died in their sleep. At least it was dark. At least they won't have seen the rockets signed by the senders. At least they won't have seen the signatures. At least it was nighttime. A single airstrike, at least. At least in their last moments, their souls had already left their bodies to the air of dreams, the unseen land, a place in hiding where eyes are open, at least. At least they were drowsy, or at least not fully awake. At least if they startled, it would have been quick. Or at least, if slow, they were floating into a dreamy transition to the next world. At least, now they're just waiting for a proper burial. At least it's over now. At least for the dead. At least these children don't need to fear the dark. At least, not anymore.
Thank you, William. Thank you for reading that poem, such an important poem as well. I can see many of you are so deeply moved by it as well. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving poetry time. As you know, and as William has been saying again and again, we need it now more than ever in our lives. We will open it up for questions now. If you could just raise your hand if you have one, and someone will come around with a mic. I would really appreciate if you stick to questions and maybe not comments, because this is your chance to actually ask William something about poems.
Hello. I know no comments, but this session is a total delight. Thanks to all three of you. Now, Mr. Sieghart, this question is for you. You mentioned you refer to your age repeatedly, and I feel the same. I feel I'm getting older. But I see you so visibly moved by the stories you tell and the poems you read and the poems you hear. But within myself, I'm a very regular person, but I do feel a sense of hardening, maybe to protect your feelings from being affected by everything you read and go through. And I've always loved poetry, but recently I've found myself not responding to it as I used to. And I wonder, it can't be age, because you are surely older than I am. So I don't know how to get that sensitivity back, and I wonder if many people feel the same way. Is it because I've read too much, or is it because I haven't read enough? I really don't know.
Thank you. Well, that's a lovely question, isn't it? We've never read enough. That's very important. I always say to people that when you read poetry, you should read it aloud. If you can't read it aloud because you're on the bus or with other people, read it aloud in your head. You shouldn't read poetry like fiction or journalism. It's a bit like reading a letter, if you remember letters, those things we used to write. But you want to hear the voice. And I often say to people as well, read the same poem 5 nights in a row. People say to me that they fall asleep if they read a novel after their long and challenging day. So read the same poem and you will find the reaction, the feelings, the thoughts you get different every single day from that same poem, depending possibly on your own rhythms and what you've been to. So try that and see if it softens your heart to poetry again.
Thank you. And thank you for that lovely question. We had another question here in the front, maybe. And then maybe we can go there. Yeah. Hi.
Hi. I was wondering, a lot of your poetry is about like despair and like loneliness and more of like negative emotions. And even the word like poetry pharmacy sounds like it has to be a prescription. So do you have things for like happiness or joy, or if somebody's in a very like amazing state of their life, because we should all hope to be there?
Well, yes, I do. And actually I made a lovely book for children. And it's a beautiful, big, illustrated book. And it's called Everyone Sang, a poem for every feeling. There was a famous poet called Siegfried Sassoon, who's only known for writing gloomy poems. He was a First World War poet who died in the First World War. But he wrote an extraordinary poem, which I delight in called Everyone Sang. Everyone suddenly burst out singing, and I was filled with such delight, as prisoned birds must find in freedom, winging wildly across the white orchards and dark green fields, on, and out of sight. Everyone's voice was suddenly lifted, and beauty came like the setting sun. My heart was shaken with tears, and horror drifted away. Oh, but everyone was a bird, and the song was wordless, and the singing will never be done.
We had another question, I think, in the front here. Is it? Yeah. Where's the mic? Ah, there. Thank you. And then maybe we can go there.
Yeah. So you spoke about how people in England are ashamed of poetry, and ma'am mentioned how poetry is something we are afraid to share because of our vulnerabilities. I'm sorry. So I wanted to ask if there is a prescription specifically for a poet's shame that we have as writers. Because when we write something, we tend to self-criticize, and we tend to hide our poetry rather than showing it to the world. Is there something that you would prescribe for that shame as a writer?
I'll tell you what, I'm going to sort of half answer the question, if that's okay. Because I actually think that, I criticised the phone at the beginning because it's created so much loneliness. But actually what's so interesting to me is that one of the hard things about COVID was that we couldn't commune any longer. But equally, going back to my age, when I was young, we communed on the weekend because we all went to church and recited the same piece of poetry together. Every liturgy of every faith is utterly filled with poetry. And what has happened through COVID and through the invention of social media is that the canon of poetry has become the secular liturgy. We are now sending and whizzing round pieces of poetry through social media to fill our spiritual void. And it's actually making poetry more popular, people less ashamed of talking about it, whether you're Rupi Kaur, all these kinds of people who write very short bits of poetry, but now they have millions of followers on Instagram. And it's rather lovely because what used to happen when I was a young man was that there were probably half a dozen white, middle-class, middle-aged men who mediated all poetry because they were the poetry editors of the few publishers that publish poetry. And now, thanks to the joys of Rupi Kaur and people like that, they're being chased by all the publishers, going, you've got 3 million followers, can I publish your book? So it's wonderful.
Thank you. Also, that was such a refreshing take on social media poetry, and it's so inclusive, which is, you repeatedly show us that that is the way to be about poetry. So thank you.
Well, it's very, very important. We began with people being frightened of poetry, and lots of people nodded, and in some ways it's not surprising because the first things you learn are poems. You're doing that reading, the first bit of reading with your mum and dad and all of that. Someone's nodding. Someone's pointing. Oh, okay.
I love poetry.
Oh, good.
But whenever my teacher says I can sing a poem in some kind of a presentation, I just don't know why I refuse because I'm too nervous. But how can I overcome this?
Very good question. Okay, the way to overcome it is to learn some poems off by heart. And do you know what? The best thing of the lot, if you learn poems off by heart now, you'll remember them forever. The hard thing being old is that if I learn a poem, I've forgotten it next week. But if you learn it now, you'll learn it forever. And I promise you, those poems you learn now will become your friends for life.
Thank you, William. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you once again for honoring poetry. Thank you, William. This was just so illuminating. Thank you, Sumanto, for your beautiful readings. We will be outside and William will be signing books there, so you can join us and continue these conversations with him over there. Thank you once again.